Hello. Today we would like to welcome Luke Schaefer, a faculty member in the School of Social Work and Ford School of Public Policy, the author of the award-winning book, $2 a Day, and Director of Poverty Solutions, a University of Michigan initiative aimed at engaging the university at addressing and fighting issues of poverty. Thank you, Luke, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to have a conversation to learn a little bit more about the issue, in particular around poverty and extreme poverty, which I know has been part of your work historically and has really been at the heart of the $2 a Day book, but is also really informing work that you're doing, policy level work at the federal level, and also this incredible new initiative here at the university that you're directing. So I thought we could start by first having you help us to understand the issue of poverty and extreme poverty in the U.S. Can you help kind of describe the issue and what has driven extreme poverty in your opinion?
Yeah. So we know that a lot of families in the United States struggle to make ends meet. A big fraction of Americans say they wouldn't have the money to cover a crisis cost of like $1,000 or $2,000. We know that about half of all babies are on WIC, the Supplemental Nutrition Program. We know roughly 40%, maybe a little less than 40% of kids are on public health insurance. So there's a lot of families who need support that are, and we know these benefits matter. About 12.7% of Americans are under the poverty threshold, which is, maybe $23,000 for a family of four. But if you go further down, the federal government tracks what's called deep poverty, which is families surviving on incomes below half the poverty line. And we have some research that finds that those families have a particularly significant number of challenges, that poverty is stickier, that they're more likely to be in poverty over long periods of time, that they're more likely to face food insecurity and other forms of material hardship. In our case, I, throughout most of my career, have been studying large-scale data sets. I've been using big, data sets and charts and different statistical techniques to try to understand how the public programs that we have matter for families who are struggling to make ends meet. So I'm sort of a self-proclaimed data nerd. Data makes me feel warm and cuddly inside. But I got to meet Kathy Eden. She was my partner on $2 a Day. And she does this thing that's a little less common in the academy, although I know you're going to talk to Kristen Seefelt. And she does this too, which is when she wants to learn about something like poverty in America, she actually goes out and talks to people. And she had been meeting with families around their kitchen table, going with them on their day's activities for over 2 decades. And when I met her in 2011, she said, Luke, I'm seeing something different than I've ever seen before. Families that aren't just poor by American standards, but are really deeply poor, and poor in a particular way, which is they lack access to money. They lack access to cash. So in many cases, they might have food stamps, now called SNAP. A small fraction had public housing, although that's become less common over the last couple of decades. But they didn't have access to cash. So we wondered two things. Had there been an increase in the number of families surviving on very low levels of cash income? And if there had, did it matter? And so for the first question, we decided to look at the data. That's sort of what I brought. So I started with the best household survey data set we had, and we decided we would sort of borrow inspiration from the World Bank's measure of extreme poverty, $2 per person per day. And I'll never forget sort of sitting, I was actually working in the library that day, and seeing this chart of the number of families with kids experiencing extreme poverty just about doubling over the last 15 or 16 years. And at the height of the Great Recession, we were at about 1.5 million families with about 3 million children.
So what do you think has led to that kind of dramatic shift?
Yeah. So we started to see these numbers, and we looked at different data sets. We looked at administrative records from food stamps, because I think it's always important to make sure there's just not something weird about your data, right? Whenever you're doing research, you want to try to prove yourself wrong. And we saw it across multiple data sets and administrative sources. And we published a brief sort of based on that, and that's what led us to say, you know what, we want to understand exactly the questions you were asking. What has led to this, and what is it like? What is it like to go without cash for any meaningful amount of time? And so we decided to go back to Kathy's technology and go meet families in Chicago, Cleveland, Appalachia, and the Mississippi Delta. Get to know them and try to get answers to these questions. So we think there's three main drivers. First, in terms of families with kids, in the 1990s we had a major reform of our welfare program. What people usually think of when they think of welfare is like cash, getting a cash check for being poor. And in the 1990s, we actually did a lot of good things for poor families too. We had a major expansion of something called the Earned Income Tax Credit that supplements your wages. We made public health insurance more accessible. But with this one program, what we did was devolve a lot of the authority to the state. We maybe sort of, impose work requirements, although states figure out ways to game those even. And the result has been this huge, dramatic drop-off in the number of families getting help with this program that provides a base level of cash when you need it. And so there's no doubt in my mind when we track the states where we find extreme poverty to be the greatest, they tend to be the states with with cash assistance programs that are the smallest. So there's a direct connection there, and this huge increase is actually most dramatic among single mother families who we think would have been the most impacted. The second cause is the low-wage labor market. So we started to learn a lot about fluctuating work schedules, a lot of instability in the jobs that families had, and a lot of instability in their family lives, where Ray McCormick might get into a truck to go to work at Walmart, and the gas light turns on. She can't get there, and she loses her job. So all this instability means that, when we found families, they almost always had been working at some point, but had lost a job and things had spiraled out of control. And finally, the affordable housing crisis. So we saw just lots of examples of families who, even when they were working, couldn't afford a place of their own. So there was a lot of unstable doubling up, people couch surfing from place to place, which also led to a lot of instability. So you have, I think, this three-legged stool of factors coming together to create the challenges that we write about in the book.
Yeah, it really shows the interconnectedness of issues and how kind of one challenge in one area can have a ripple effect onto others, which is something that we've been learning about throughout the MOOC. I had a question for you about when you talk about the moving oversight from the federal government to the state government. Right. It's also something we talked about in an earlier component of the MOOC. I'm curious from your perspective about kind of that shift, kind of what happens when federal policies move, or kind of large social welfare policies move to the states. Why they shift? Is it something about what happens at state policy or different priorities? Or I'd just be curious about your insight on that. Yeah,
so I think there's some cases where state flexibility can be good. So during the Great Recession, when the unemployment was at its peak, we had a program that allowed states to experiment with subsidized jobs, where they would work with employers to create jobs for folks who were having trouble finding them. And states did different things that were sort of tailored to their labor markets. And we created a lot of jobs. We spent about $1.3 billion on it and created something like, I want to say 260,000 jobs. And that, I think, was a success. The problem with TANF, that's what welfare became, temporary assistance for needy families, is that states were given a lot of undue flexibility. And in fact, the hardest thing for a state to do in that program is actually to provide cash assistance. We set up a system where we said, you can provide cash aid, which isn't that popular with your constituents to begin with. And if you do that, we're going to impose all of these reporting requirements on you. Or you can keep your cash assistance caseloads very low and not use the money for that and use them for one of these other purposes sort of outlined in the legislation. But if you do that, we're not really going to regulate it. We won't require you to sort of really justify what you're doing. And so states can really get away with doing a lot. So I'll give you an example from here in Michigan. A couple years ago, the state was having trouble with its financial aid budget. And states have trouble with their budgets all the time, right? They have to, for the most part, keep balanced budgets. They can't run up debt like the federal government does. And so they were having trouble with their financial aid budget. They didn't really want to cut it. So what they did is say, oh, look, we have all this leftover TANF money because we're not serving as many people with cash assistance as we used to. Let's just reallocate $100 million of this money for cash welfare to our financial aid budget. And it's not going to be any more financial aid money than we ever had. It's just going to replace the revenue that was already there. So in my mind, the federal government gets really nothing for that, right? So, I mean, I'm all for college scholarships. I'm a professor, you know, but I think nobody had the intention that that's what we were going to spend that money on. And in fact, in my mind, we've actually created perverse incentives for governors and state legislatures to pilfer that money because it's so flexible and you can use it for so many things. State of Texas keeps their cash assistance caseloads extremely low. Something like standard metrics suggest, you know, less than 10 out of every 100 poor families are still getting TANF there. And they redirect a whole ton of the money to their child welfare system. Again, like child welfare is a system that we need, but is that really what we intended with the legislation? So I think we really run into problems when we give all of this flexibility and in fact incentivize not using the money for the very things that most people think it should be there. One thing we spend almost none of our TANF dollars on is programs helping people find work. So for a program that was really supposed to encourage work, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Thank you for that explanation. That was really helpful. I want to get back to your book, and you started to talk a little bit about some of the people that you interviewed and some of the issues that you learned about, and just wanted to invite you to, if there was a few more examples that you wanted to share from, as you were out hearing and learning from the families.
Yeah, so I want to say, having come in to this project as a data nerd that did most of my work, safely ensconced in my office, this was one of my first major experiences getting out and really getting to know families. I'd worked as a caseworker earlier in my career, so it wasn't totally foreign to me, but the thing I really came away with is that I never want to go back to just doing the data work. I think the data work's important, but as someone who's interested in poverty, doing your work in an office in Ann Arbor means there are often questions you don't even know to ask, right? There's things that you just don't even know are out there, and so you can't put them in your models or account for them in your regression equations. So I'll give you two quick examples. The first time I went down to Chicago and met a few of the families in our book, and then down to Cleveland, we started seeing this little divot on the inside crease of people's elbows. And I have to tell you, the first time, or maybe the first two times I saw it, I immediately thought that this was a drug track line. And I'm like, that explains why Jennifer Hernandez is having, some trouble. Maybe there's some substance abuse issues in the past. But when we started to see it enough, we started to ask about it. And it turns out that these were scars that the families, apparently the parents in particular got from selling their blood plasma so much. And it's a coping mechanism that we saw in a lot of places in the country. So when we met Jessica Compton down in Appalachia, her husband, Travis, he still had a job, but he had 0 hours at the fast food joint where he'd been working. And they were surviving purely on their food stamps and the cash money that she was getting from selling her blood plasma. Well, this is where the data is useful, because we saw this over and over again. We thought, has it become more common to sell your blood plasma? And what we found was plasma sales in the United States had actually tripled over the last decade to about 38 million plasma sales in 2016. And the United States actually accounts for 65 or 70% of the world's plasma supply and only about 40% of the demand. So we actually export the blood plasma mainly of poor Americans all around the world. And it's an incredibly profitable industry. If you want to put your money somewhere and get a good return on investment, the top plasma companies right now are a good bet. So this was a whole industry, like a whole sort of coping mechanism that I knew nothing about, and I was a poverty expert of sorts. Another example was all the ways that systems are set up in ways that have the effect of trapping people. So Monique was not in the book, but she was part of our larger sample. We met her in Tennessee, and she had lost her kids to foster care for about a year, had done everything that she could to get her kids back as soon as possible, and had found work, found a place, and she got the kids back. She had a job working at a fast food joint as well. And one day she gets her check, and she knew it should have been a couple $100s. She gets her check, and it's about $80. And she thinks, what's going on here? So she goes to her manager, and finally they find out that the state was actually charging her for child support for the time that her kids were in the foster care system. So they had removed her kids from her care, and now she was having to pay back all the cost of that over the course of the last year. And the amount that she owed would just be garnished from her wages, and they were going to charge, I think, 12% interest until she paid it off. So in this case, actually, it's an example where my data doesn't show that she's living in $2 a day poverty, because I usually am just looking at her gross paycheck. But in fact, she was. And it's hard to imagine how, bringing in, working as much as she was, but only bringing in $70 or $80 in any given 2-week paycheck, how she was ever going to climb out of that hole. And we see a lot of examples like that. We just had Peter Edelman to campus, who wrote a book called It's Not a Crime to Be Poor, who talked about the sort of increasing ways in which especially low-income Americans are sort of charged for services, or they might not get their car registered because they can't afford it. Think, we'll wait a week or two, and then they get pulled over, they get a ticket for that, and then they can't afford that, and that spirals up. And in Michigan, for example, if your fines get too high, your driver's license gets suspended, which we know is a major barrier to employment. So in the state of Michigan, I think we've had bills passed through both houses in the legislature, and they have to be reconciled to stop doing that, stop taking people's driver's licenses away for these big fines and fees. But the state actually has challenges because it's a big moneymaker, right? So the state is making a lot of revenue on the fines and fees that it's charging, disproportionately low-income Michiganders to get their license back, or just a lot of the fines and fees have increased on their own, which is a part of the problem. So you don't, I think, until you're embedded in these systems and sort of understand that they exist, you don't even know to ask about them.
Wow, it sounds like your book raised so many important issues, and again, the kind of complexity of how these systems are interlinked and the effect that they have on families. I'm wondering if we can shift a little bit to now thinking about solutions. And based on what you've learned and the challenges that you saw, what are some of the suggestions? I know that you've been doing work to start to kind of identify potential solutions and start to work to enact them. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your work in that area.
Well, in answering that question, we started by asking the families what they wanted. We would ask, if we came back in a year and things were going well, what would it look like? And none of them mentioned cash welfare, despite the fact that we thought that was a major driver, and we happen to think it's important to have a cash safety net. what they really to a person mentioned was that they wanted a job paying $10 to $12 an hour with stable work schedules and a place of their own. And so I think we're beholden to them in trying to figure out policies that can help promote those visions, right? How do we increase the number of jobs? How do we help families stay in the jobs? And actually, it's part of our the Obama White House. We're interested in the book. A lot of the folks involved in social policy read the book, and in their final budget, they actually proposed a program that would help in these crisis moments. Because what we're seeing is it's not always that somebody's not working at all, ever. It's that the work is unsteady and that people can't stay in those jobs. So we're really interested in programs that will increase the number of jobs and also provide support to families that can get to them right in those crisis moments, right? When Ray gets into her truck and the gas light's on, she knows she can't get to her Walmart job. How can we get her help right then so that she can? And so success coach models, we think, have some promise to do that. And they're models of which are problem solving, right? Where caseworkers can help figure out problems in the short term and the long term. Now, I still happen to think we need a cash safety net. But I have come to think, especially because of the result of TANF, that all this flexibility is problematic. Sometimes I think that policy wonks like me overthink policies, that we like to make things more complicated than they need to be. And whenever you increase how complicated a program is, you risk creating unintended consequences. So I and actually 9 other scholars have put together a program proposal called a child allowance. So it turns out a lot of other Western industrialized countries say, hey, it's expensive to have kids, and we have a societal sort of obligation to help with the raising of kids, since they are the future of the and the present of the country. We're going to provide a small cash stipend, usually on a monthly or maybe on a quarterly basis, that will help with that. And it actually turns out in the United States, we do provide something akin to this through the child tax credit and a child deduction. But you have to be higher up the income ladder to really benefit from it. And so what we're recommending is that we provide one universal benefit to families with kids that says raising kids is expensive, and we want to provide a little bit of support for that. And in our paper, we recommend about $250 per kid per month. And this would be a stable thing that you wouldn't have to worry. So one of the challenges that Paul Ryan in particular has noted is these marginal tax rates, where in some cases when you earn more, your benefits decline, and you might actually end up no better off than you were, or even worse off, right? And so the nice thing about a child allowance is it's just simple. It's universal. Everybody gets the same amount. And if we fold in the cost of it, just replace the child deduction and the child tax credit with this new program, we can do it. I think for $100 billion, which is roughly the cost of some of the recent programs, such as the recent tax cut, and reduce child poverty. I think we estimated it would reduce child poverty by 40%, deep poverty by about 50%, and completely eliminate the kind of $2 a day cash poverty that we're writing about in the book in a very simple way. So, we were really pleased that there was some interest among some U.S. Senators. Michael Bennet and Sherrod Brown sponsored a bill this past spring that would have implemented something like this at the federal level. And I think it provides a vision of what we could really do. And it's based on, I think, a lot of research that we're getting that really shows cash infusions are one of the best ways that we can actually help families. And that's important for the field of social work, right? We tend to think services and the things we offer maybe are better. But I think we always have to wonder, are what we're providing, is it providing a better value to the family I'm serving than providing them with the cash? And the evidence would suggest that it's hard to beat cash, because families often know what it is that they need the most, right? And when we rely on a lot of in-kind benefits, we're sort of telling them what they need, and it's not always as efficient as just giving the flexible money income. But it's a tougher sell to Americans, so that's the, that's the rub.
Where so many of our policies have been embedded with a whole set of, different rules and regulations about what they can spend on. And
I'll give you, a great example. We have a couple studies that follow what happened on native lands with the adoption of casinos, right? So some reservations and native lands establish casinos. And we know all about sort of, I think, some of the controversy around casinos. But one of the positive outcomes of that is that families receive a cash stipend as a result of that. Anybody sort of on the land or a part of the group that started the casino gets a cash stipend. And we can see sort of some very positive effects among kids, right? Of better academic achievement, reduced sort of criminal justice outcomes. And across the families, as these cash stipends started coming in, actually reduced substance abuse and reduced drug abuse. And so I think that goes to speak to the fact that sometimes substance abuse problems are a response to stress and actually not the cause of stress. Canada actually just greatly increased its child allowance. A lot of people were really impressed with the positive impacts of that. And, I remain hopeful that this is something that at some point it might be a road we go down.
I just have one other quick follow-up on this, and then I know I want to get to poverty, the work you're doing with poverty solutions. But in terms of universal versus targeted programs, I'm sure that that's something that you all thought about. I'm wondering, we talked a little bit about it in an earlier module about just the difference between programs that target individuals versus kind of universal benefit. And I'm wondering if you could just share a few words about kind of how you were thinking about that relative to this child allowance.
So I think this is a great debate that we are going to continue to have. So the benefits of a targeted policy is it can be implemented at a much lower cost, right? And the allocation of resources we think are more efficient. So with a program like a child allowance, kids, in our case, we actually extend the benefit all the way up. In the bill that I was talking about, they actually phase out benefits at 100,000 or so. But you're giving benefits to a lot of people who might be doing well otherwise. And so the argument for targeting is that we can be better stewards of our resources and really get it to the families who need it. The argument for universal benefits is that when you create programs for poor people, as some have said, you often create poor programs. You create programs that are marginalized in and of themselves, that can be administered in ways that strip dignity, and can actually create some animosity in a society where people say, why are they getting this benefit, right? It's a way of othering. So the argument for universal policies is that we all get into the same boat. And so some, like Theda Skocpol from Harvard, argue these are actually a more effective way, when possible, to fight poverty, because it puts everyone in the same boat and programs become much more stable politically. So I'll often ask my students, and if you're in my class, this is something that you would, I think, hear every semester, right? Is the question is, what's the most successful anti-poverty program we've ever had? And the answer is Social Security, right? It's a program where, as we see benefits roll in, the elderly poverty rate just plummets. And we really do provide a base level support for virtually all Americans once they hit retirement age. But there's nothing in the framing of Social Security that says it's a poverty program, right? It's a universal program. People pay into it. and the amount that you have to pay in is relatively low, right? So you don't see a whole lot of people who are excluded from benefits. But the effect is reducing poverty to significant degrees among the elderly. So I think this is a debate, and I'm not sure if our proposal for a child allowance that extends benefits all the way up is exactly the right way to do it. But I have come to think that the more that we can bring everyone into the same policy structure, the more sustainable and stable these programs will be. And something else that we didn't talk about, but is the subject of the next book project, is around the importance of dignity and how people really want the opportunity to contribute and to be a meaningful part of society. And I think the more that we target programs, specifically for poor and marginalized Americans, the more that we separate them from society. And so I think there's a lot to the notion of trying to open these things up so that everybody's in the same boat.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to talk about this incredible new center initiative here at the University of Michigan, Poverty Solutions.
Yeah.
And maybe just talk a little bit about maybe the history or how the initiative came into being, and some of your current work and your vision for how this initiative can really help engage the university in addressing poverty.
Yeah. So President Schlissel here at U of M speaks very eloquently about the fact that major public institutions of higher education should be about the work of trying to solve some of our toughest problems. And through a series of roundtables with faculty, he found that a lot of faculty were working on issues related to poverty, especially in the United States. Maybe they didn't call it poverty, but they called it affordable housing or environmental justice, or programs for youth and young adults. And so he made a commitment to fund a university-wide initiative called Poverty Solutions. And our mission is to find new ways to prevent and alleviate poverty. We look for partnerships with policymakers, partnerships with community-based organizations to really figure out innovative ways that can help reduce some of these sort of concrete challenges that face our most vulnerable families. And the exciting thing about this work, and I have to tell you, it's the most fun that I've ever had working, right, is that ideas come from all over the place. So we're partnering with the Snyder administration on the state, and I think they're very interesting community ventures program that partners with private employers to create jobs for individuals who are having trouble with the jobs, and adopts the success coach model like I was telling you about. A lot of our work is focused in the city of Detroit, and we've been doing a lot of work with the mayor's team in Detroit that is really interested in taking the next step to find out how do you increase mobility and reduce intergenerational poverty in the city. And we're doing a variety of things. So we have helped fund some work by Rashanak Medipana and colleagues at the School of Public Health around tax foreclosure in the city of Detroit, where we see a big reason why people lose their homes is because they're foreclosed on because of not paying property taxes. And in some cases, actually, a renter might be going along paying their rent, and the landlord isn't paying their property taxes, and the renter gets evicted as a result. And as part of that work, we've been helping to promote this program called the Poverty Property Tax Exemption that actually is on the books. It's something that says if you prove that you're low income, you will be waived of your property taxes will be waived. And we think there are about 30 or 40,000 households in Detroit that are eligible, and only about 3,000 get it. So trying to understand what's going on with that gap, both in the fact that the application is very arduous, right? You have to get it notarized, have to bring in report cards for your kids, and also figure out how to let families know that benefit's out there. Another really exciting development was around something called the right of first refusal, which was actually a partnership between some community-based organizations, a great one called the United Community Housing Coalition, Quicken Loans and Rock Ventures in the city of Detroit. And they basically piloted a program last year, which was drummed up at an event that we hosted, that said people who are renters should be given the first option to buy the house before it goes up on one of these auctions after being foreclosed on. And so we're going to now, some folks at the Taubman School and School of Public Health are going to be working to evaluate that program. I think it's a great example of the type of thing we want to be doing. Just one other example of work that we're helping to support is around community health workers. So some incredible work by Mike Spencer and Edie Kiefer at the School of Social Work, among many others, have shown that you can train someone from a disadvantaged community in a relatively short amount of time to provide preventive health services in ways that actually improve health, that help families, help people get in control of their diabetes and other, especially chronic conditions. And so that experimental evidence is out there, but right now we don't have any sustainable funding mechanism to support community health workers. So the project that we're helping to support is actually doing a big infusion of community health workers into the Cody Rouge neighborhood of Detroit to try to tackle a couple of community-level markers of health, including reducing the number of chronic emergency department utilizers, right? Trying to help people through these community health workers find other avenues. And if we can show community-level effects, right? That's a big if still, but if we can, then that really helps to make the case to Medicaid to start reimbursing for community health workers, which in my mind creates more avenues for decent jobs that provide opportunities to make contributions to society. And so that gets me back, right to where I want it to be at the end of $2 a day.
Yeah, really listening to communities, helping them to identify issues, helping to fund innovative programs, and use that to drive new policies.
Yep, that's the sweet spot we want to be in, and so it's really been exciting work. I really enjoy learning from my colleagues at the engineering school who are doing stuff on ways to revamp public transportation. We've funded nursing. We have a law professor who's working on issues around ability to pay and these questions of fines and fees. So it's exciting to see and inspiring, frankly, to see all the work that's being done. And we do it from a place of humility, too, to try to change this notion that, faculty at the University of Michigan know everything, that we're the experts, right? And we do bring a certain expertise, but we don't know everything. And so trying to do things really in a spirit of partnership, learning as we go, trying to listen to priorities of our partners who right now are coming from across the political spectrum, from a lot of sort of partnerships across differences, whether it be race and ethnicity, gender, geography. And so I'm really excited about what we've done in our first year. We're still relatively new and hopeful for what I think we can do going forward.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for this incredible interview and for the time that you've taken and the information you've shared. And thank you to all of you for watching.